Unbroken, Chapter 2, Run Like Mad, pages 13 through 16. The rehabilitation of Louis Zamperini began in 1931 with a key. 14-year-old Louis was in a locksmith shop when he heard someone say that if you put a key in any lock, it has a 1 in 50 chance of fitting. Inspired, Louis began collecting keys and trying locks. He had no luck until he tried his house key on the back door of the Torrance High gym. When basketball season began, there was an inexplicable discrepancy between the number of 10-cent tickets sold and the considerably larger number of kids in the bleachers. In late 1931, someone caught on, and Louis was hauled into the principal's office for the umpteenth time. In California, winter-born students who entered new grades in January. So Louis was about to start ninth grade. The principal punished him by making him ineligible for athletic and social activities. Louis, who never joined in anything, was indifferent. When Pete learned what had happened, he headed straight to the principal's office. Though his mother didn't yet speak much English, he towed her along to give his presentation some weight. He told the principal that Louis craved attention but never won it in the form of praise, so he sought it in the form of punishment. If Louis were recognized for doing something right, Pete argued, he'd turn his life around. He asked the principal to allow Louis to join a sport. When the principal balked, Pete asked him if he could live with allowing Louis to fail. It was a cheeky thing for a 16-year-old to say to a principal, but Pete was the one kid in Torrance who could get away with such a remark and make it persuasive. Louis was made eligible for athletics for 1932. Pete had big plans for Louis. As senior in the 1931-32 school year, he would graduate with 10 varsity letters, including 3 in basketball and 3 in baseball. But it was track in which he earned 4 varsity letters, tied the school half-mile record, and set its mile record of 5 minutes and 6 seconds. That was his true forte. Looking at Louis, whose getaway speed was his saving grace, Pete thought he saw the same incipient talent. As it turned out, it wasn't Pete who got Louis onto the track for the first time. It was Louis's weakness for girls. In February, the 9th grade girls began assembling a team for an inter-class track meet, and in a class with only 4 boys, Louis was the only male who looked like he could run. The girls worked their charms, and Louis found himself standing on the track, barefoot, for a 660-yard race. When everyone ran, he followed, churning along with jimmying elbows and dropping far behind. As he labored home last, he heard tittering. Gasping and humiliated, he ran straight off the track and hid under the bleachers. The coach muttered something about how that kid belonged anywhere but in a foot race. "He's my brother," Pete replied. From that day on, Pete was all over Louis, forcing him to train, then dragging him to the track to run in a second meet. Urged on by the kids in the stands, Louis put in just enough effort to beat one boy and finish third. He hated running, but the applause was intoxicating, and the prospect of more was just enough incentive to keep him marginally compliant. Pete herded him out to train every day and rode his bicycle behind him, whacking him with a stick. Louis dragged his feet, bellyached, and quit at the first sign of fatigue. Pete made him get up and keep going. Louis started winning. At the season's end, he became the first Torrance kid to make the all-city finals. He finished 5th. Pete had been right about Louis' talent, but to Louis, training felt more like one more constraint. At night, he listened to the whistles of the passing trains, and one day in the summer of 1932, he couldn't bear it any longer. It began over a chore that Louis's father asked him to do. Louis resisted, a spat ensued, and Louis threw some clothes into a bag and stormed toward the front door. His parents ordered him to stay. Louis was beyond persuasion. As he walked out, his mother rushed to the kitchen and emerged with a sandwich wrapped in waxed paper. Louis stuffed it in his bag and left. He was partway down the front walk when he heard his name called. When he turned, there was his father, grim-faced, holding $2 in his outstretched hand. It was a lot of money for a man whose paycheck didn't bridge the week. Louis took it and walked away. He rounded up a friend, and together they hitchhiked to Los Angeles, broke into a car, and slept on the seats. The next day, they jumped a train, climbed onto the roof, and rode north. The trip was a nightmare. The boys got locked into a boxcar so hot that they were soon frantic to escape. Louis found a discarded strip of metal, climbed on his friend's shoulders, pried a vent open, squirmed out, and then helped his friend out, badly cutting himself in the process. Then they were discovered by the railroad detective who forced them to jump from the moving train at gunpoint. After several days of walking, getting chased out of orchards and grocery stores where they tried to steal food, they wound up sitting on the ground in a rail yard, filthy, bruised, sunburned, and wet, sharing a can of stolen beans. A train rattled past. Lou looked up. I saw beautiful white tablecloths and crystal on the tables, and food, people laughing and enjoying themselves and eating, he said later. And I was sitting there shivering, eating a miserable can of beans. He remembered the money in his father's hand and the fear in his mother's eyes as she offered him a sandwich. He stood up and headed home. When Louis walked into his house, Louise threw her arms around him, inspected him for injuries, led him to the kitchen, and gave him a cookie. Anthony came home, saw Louis, and sank into his chair, his face soft with relief. After dinner, Louis went upstairs, dropped into bed, and whispered his surrender to Pete.